Hey, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's good to see everyone again this week. See everybody made it to another Sabbath. It started here where I'm at about 15, 20 minutes ago. So we're going to start off this show talking about, or we're going to use the show talking about the temple and what's going to have to be done in order for it to be built in that. But first off, we're going to take you out. All right. Well, why don't you give us a joke and get us started?
Okay. See this cute little boy with a cowboy hat. And this was called my favorite animal. Our teacher asked what my favorite animal was. So I said, fried chicken. She said, I wasn't funny. But she couldn't have been right because everyone else laughed. My parents told me that was funny. And my parents told me to always tell the truth. I did. Fried chicken is my favorite animal. I told my dad what happened, and he said my teacher was probably a member of PETA. He said they love animals very much, actually maybe too much. I do too, especially fried chicken. Anyway, my teacher sent me to the principal's office. I told him what happened. He laughed too. Then he told me not to do it again. Next day in class, my teacher asked me what my favorite live animal was. I told it was chicken. She asked me why. So I told her because you could make it into fried chicken. You guessed it, she sent me back to the principal's office. He laughed also, and he told me not to do it again. I don't understand. My parents taught me to be honest. My teacher doesn't like it when I am. Today my teacher asked me to tell her what famous person in the world I most admired. I told her Colonel Sanders. And just to add a little extra, the young man says, and guess where I am right now? Well, it's different.
It's different.
It's different, right?
Yeah. So this week we're going to talk about the temple and mostly about the future building of the temple and what we know about it, and we'll explore what the Bible says about it.
Okay. One thing I thought might be good to mention is that when the original temple prophecy about desolating the temple was given, the temple did not exist. So if someone today says, well, you got these prophecies about the temple, no temple exists. It didn't exist when the first prophecy was given. Let me just give a little bit of background. Daniel, of course, is with the exiles and wrote the book of Daniel. Angels gave him all this valuable information. He wrote it in 534 BC. The desolation of the temple did not happen until almost 4 centuries later, 168 BC. Give 20-some years, almost 400 centuries. So he wrote all this in advance. By the way, the one thing about the book of Daniel that critics of the Bible can't stand, you compare Daniel 11 very carefully with the history of the Alexander the Great's empire and how it fell apart into 4 lands, and the king of the south became dominant, and all the plotting. It fits the book of Daniel too perfectly. The Jews must have somehow The only problem with the Jews conspiring is the Jews had synagogues scattered in, different places. Well, if every so often one of Daniel's prophecies came true, they'd have to collect all the books, rewrite it again, redistribute it. I mean, well, that problem would be worse today, of course. You had to do it in the millions. But it's still the same problem, and they would know their book is a fake. And most of all, what Daniel said 2,500 years ago is going to come true. That's how the Armstrongs knew that Europe would try to unite, and how Mr. Armstrong knew that they would try to build an Islamic caliphate. They've been saying that for years, because I've been in the church 40-some years. They've been saying that for years. And now we see it happening. So, any comments so far?
Well, history repeats itself. The human condition is what it is, and when Moses took the children of Egypt out, God walked them for 40 years for a reason. But 40 years after that, they were right back. I would think if I were in Egypt and I saw these plagues happen to these Egyptians, and this guy said, and the greatest empire there was falls, and Pharaoh's army engulfed in the Red Sea, that when I got out to the wet desert, and you could see God up on the mountain, they could see fire and smoke up on the mountain, why in the world would I go back to those ways? But the human beings will just simply cycle back. And so it's logical that they're going to build another temple.
Yeah. We were talking, David and I was talking before the program is just a cycle in Kings where one king would come in and they would, desecrate the temple, and they would have, sacrifices, and they'd be gone, and then another king would come in and do good in the sight of the Lord, and he'd be rewarded, and it was just one after another after another.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. People misbehave. And I say the thing about Daniel that's so amazing is the level of accuracy written so far in advance that I think the only explanation is either there is a real inspired God who inspired Daniel's writing, who can make history go the way he wants it and can see the future, or else. And there's no other explanation for it. So Daniel, more than any other book, proves the inspiration of the Bible. And anybody who wants to go through Daniel, well, just for instance, Daniel 11:4. Daniel 11 talks about a mighty king that beats the Persians. No one can stand up to him. And then it says suddenly, his kingdom was divided into the four winds, north, south, east, and west. The four generals of Daniel, when he suddenly died, Alexander the Great, that Daniel wrote about. When Alexander the Great suddenly died, the four generals took over and made themselves kings. And then the king of the north and the king of the south in time became the most dominant. I want to go to Daniel 11:31, because what we really want to look at is what's happening in the world today. Daniel 11:31 is, an arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. Now, this is mentioned in other places in the New Testament as well. And basically it means they are going to desolate a temple. The temple didn't even exist when Daniel wrote this, but it was rebuilt, of course, as you would expect, to fulfill prophecy. Going to 11:45, and they shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yes, shall they come to his end, and none shall help him. Basically what verse 45 says, that after the king of the north comes in suddenly and desecrates the temple, he will set up his headquarters. The holy mountain is Mount Zion. It means Jerusalem. That the beast is going to set himself up in Jerusalem to be worshipped as God. We go to 2 Thessalonians, you'll read about it. That is going to happen. And let me give you a little bit of the history of it, and then let's discuss how the world is right now. And 168 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes was driven back and the Romans intervened, and he felt the pressure. He was angry. So he went back to Jerusalem, and he also undermined some of the Jews as well to get away from the true religion. But he basically desecrated the temple by putting a statue of Zeus right in the holy place and slaughtering a swine on the altar, which to Jews is desolating the temple. And many other bad things he did at that time. And Christ uses that horrific event, which the Jews later cleaned up with the Maccabean Wars, but to Jewish people, that's a great historic marker, a horrible event. Christ used that event as a mark toward the end time. Now, for the end time to come, the king of the north has to come at the king of the south like a whirlwind. And the king of the south has to push at him. Well, you realize that up until just recently, there was no king of the south. The Arab world was as divided as it could possibly be to many different feuding factions. And the idea of them uniting, or a good chunk of them uniting into a super caliphate, that's the Islamic term for their kingdom or empire, looked almost ridiculous. But now, ISIS claims they've already done it and are in the process of consolidating their power.
Well, ISIS is apparently moving rapidly through Iraq. I forget where it was. I read this scripture a week or so ago. It says the Medes shall overthrow the Babylonians, and I'm doing this my best because I don't have it exact, but shall team up with the Assyrians. Well, the Medes, that's Persia or Iran. Babylon is Iraq. And the Assyrians were northern Persians that have migrated to form the country Germany. And I know in World War II that the Iranians did fight alongside the Germans. And I could see ISIS decimating Iraq to the point that Iran can go in and take that.
Well, that is a big, if I were just guessing, you realize no one knows, it's really up to the devil. And let me read one more verse, and then let's talk about the devil and his role in this whole thing. 12:11, we'll get to what Christ said. This fits what Christ said. 12:11, Daniel 12:11. And from that time, that the daily sacrifice should be taken away. And if you want to look that up, Numbers 28, they sacrificed a perfect lamb in the morning sacrifice and the evening sacrifice at the tabernacle or the temple every day, morning and evening sacrifices. Well, when the bad guy comes in, he's going to take the temple and take away the sacrifices. And I assume the way it's written in Thessalonians, he's going to sit on a throne being worshipped as God himself, probably with TV cameras on him, right there, and probably put swine's blood on the altar just to complete the anti-Semitism of it. When the abominations make it desolate, when the daily sacrifice should be taken away, that's morning and afternoon, lamb, which by the way represents Christ, that's a precursor of Jesus Christ. So those lambs are important. And the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. And you'll also see that same thing talked about in the book of Revelation. It all fits in together. One key time marker of the end time is the king of the south pushing at the king of the north, the king of the north coming in like a whirlwind and taking the temple and desecrating it. So looking at that timeline of events, before any of that can happen, we have to have a king of the south.
Yeah.
And
even if ISIS, just as real quick, I just want to say, even if ISIS is not going to create the king of the south directly, they could indirectly by the Arab nations uniting against ISIS because they're so radical. So you could definitely, maybe ISIS is not the answer to the king of the south, but the Arab governments uniting to get rid of them because they're just butchering everybody.
And I can see one thing. They say a lot of young radical jihadists love, I mean, they really do love the idea of a caliphate. And now ISIS is, and I think the violence against infidels, some of them don't really mind it. In other words, they have got the idea stirred up in the minds of the young Islamic jihadists. Even if they don't win, that idea is now alive, and somebody is going to make it happen. I don't you kind of sense that? I'm sure Turkey might like to do it. Iran would certainly like to do it. Maybe someone in Saudi Arabia or Egypt would like to do it. But I guarantee you the drive is on to do it. And I think ISIS is now going to be fighting it out with their competitors to consolidate power. And if you look at the book of Revelation, and when I read the whole thing, I get the impression that victory is going to be decided. I mean, the beast will get his power from the devil. And that's what you get when you read Revelation. The devil gives the beast his power. Well, isn't it logical that if you have two beasts, king of the north, king of the south, though the king of the north is the strongest, and I don't want to diminish that, isn't it logical that the devil would also give the king of the south his power too?
Well, I agree with that. I kind of backstep a little bit if I could. This ISIS thing, the world is looking at this, and you got a lot of people on two different sides of the road on this. But some people are saying that represents all of Islam. So I can see a lot of the Muslims who want to keep to make their religion look better and their people look better, being real upset with the extreme cruelty that ISIS is doing. Because the rest of the world may start turning and saying, we don't want any Islamic in our country or any Muslim in our streets or whatever, because they start assuming that is all Islam. Now, I can see that those leaders saying we've got damage control with these guys and maybe teaming up together to try to put a stop to that because it's making them look so bad.
I think I heard this on the radio last week. There were some airstrikes against ISIS, and America hadn't yet agreed to do anything. So it couldn't be American. They think it might have been Iranian or Turkish. And they didn't, and maybe it's not clear, that there are others who really want to fight it out with ISIS. But you get this weird feeling. I'm going to just give you an example. My wife gave me this thing from great courses on the rise of Hitler to power. And it's clear to me that Hitler was a nobody. His party was a nobody, even in 1924 with his beer hall push. But the devil somehow worked out events to put Hitler in power. Just too many things worked his way. And I'm just saying, ISIS seems to be getting a lot of lucky breaks. Like,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I know exactly what you mean, because if you read the history of how Hitler got to power, it's amazing how many times he avoided death and how many times he needed someone else to step in and push him into the position he ended up in.
I just think, to me, you see the head of the devil in Adolf Hitler in World War II, and you know the devil loved the final solution. The level of anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, anti-infidel, and some other terms of ISIS, the devil loves. Now, I'm not saying that they're the ones. I don't know, but I wouldn't bet against them either. They've been awful lucky. I heard them the other day. They were discussing how the what do they call the fighters from northern Iraq? No, there's a name for
the Kurds.
Maybe it's called the Kurdistan. There's some famous fighters that are known for their combat savvy, but they said we can't do much because nobody has supplied us with weapons. America refused to do it months ago. Nobody supplied us with weapons, and now ISIS has the best weapons in the world. They have American weapons. Apparently, the brave Iraqi army, when ISIS started murdering people who started moving, their soldiers were so cowardly, or whatever the term is, They threw down all their weapons, ran off from the garage, leaving all those tanks and Humvees and armored personnel carriers and everything else, and ran for their lives like cowards, leaving all those American weapons to be scooped up by these guys. Now, that is pretty lucky, don't you think?
That seems to be their MO. I read the book American Sniper, and that he said that they had such difficulty trying to train them to fight because we would move into position or whatever, and when we'd look, they were leaving. He said they'd be in the vehicles just going the other direction. So that seems to be kind of the personality in that country.
Yeah, how long did it take us to run through Iraq in the second push?
Was it 3 weeks? They were all. I remember 3 weeks. They were all the way to Baghdad. Actually, beating Saddam's army, even with bad weather, wasn't that hard. It's that they had all those Islamic guerrillas in the country, and their own internal civil war was, in other words, trying to make them into a democracy was the biggest problem. But it actually reminds me of Vietnam. There are similarities, bad similarities. The South Vietnamese army, without American advisors, the communists were ruthless. I mean, they chopped bodies up. Believe me when I say the communists are ruthless, and our press never noticed it or didn't talk about it much. These guys are even more ruthless than the communists were. But the South Vietnamese soldiers were scared. Without American advisors, they just were cowardly. Because infantry tactics are not that complicated. You hold your line and you fight back. When they start running, everybody else runs.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem the Iraqi army had when they were retreating was tripping over each other, trying to get out of the way of the American army. Pretty much they couldn't retreat fast enough, if I remember right.
Yeah. Now, if we had left our advisors there, probably none of this would have happened. But that's probably all in the devil's plan as well. So I'm just saying, you see, the devil seems to be getting all the breaks, and he's giving them to ISIS. Now you realize I don't know how this is going to end, but I do believe the blood, they've tasted the desire for a caliphate, and they're going to get one. Somebody's going to give it to them. Don't you sense that?
Yeah. And I think what we're getting at is these are events that lead up to, these things have to come to pass before the temple is built. So these are what we're looking at, what could lead up to. And you know what the interesting part is, we've known about these prophecies coming that are supposed to come to pass for quite a while, but you never could really think about how it could happen. You couldn't look at the events in the world and say, oh yeah, that's how that could happen. Well, we can do that today. We can see the world events in the news, and we can say, you know what, now I can see how this prophecy could come to pass and the events that could lead up to that. We couldn't really see that up till today.
And the fighter was the Kashmerga fighters. That's the ones who's Kashmerga fighters I was trying to think of. That don't seem to have any good weapons. Also, this is just a thought. What would make Israel build the temple? Because they have several deep religious divides among the religious Jews, and the secular Jews don't want to do anything to make the Arabs mad. They don't even, according to who you read, don't even want the Sabbath enforced at all. The point I'm getting at is, at least when it comes to the temple, Israel is very divided, and the Arabs who live in the country definitely don't want it. They riot even at the thought of Jews even getting up on the holy mountain. But this is something that I think GTA said in various words. He said something bad will have to happen that will shake little Israel in such a way that they're going to look for some way to be blessed and protected. And the logical thing is, let's build the temple.
Well, just off the top of my head, another thing that we couldn't see is where they're more and more isolated. The state of Israel is more and more isolated as all their allies pull back. I think isolation will lead them to, as the saying goes, there's no atheists in foxholes. Once they're pushed into the corner and there's no one else to help them, why not? Why not do anything you can to preserve your race, including going back to the Bible and going back to the roots of that nation and trying to, gain God's help and, preserve them. Why not? If you're all alone and you're pushed in the corner, why not?
Well, you pray a lot more when you're in pain.
Yep.
And fear. And I could see, right after 9/11, they said church attendance went up 40, 50, 60% or something. I could see them saying America's not got our back. No, England does not have our back. We're just on our own. And what we've got to do is become even better Jews, because God will always protect us. And this will lead them to building a temple.
Yep. I think that's the scenario that we can see at this point.
And remember, they don't believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. So sacrificing a lamb representing the coming of the Son of God, as they did originally, I could see that starting over again.
Because they got to have the morning and evening sacrifices for the beast to stop, and altar to desolate. And by the way, those who say, well, for New Testament people, the temple's not important. By the way, if you go to Mark 11, 15 to 18, but it's also in all four Gospels, but I just mentioned that one. You go there, what you will see is Christ was upset that they were diminishing and desecrating the sacrifice on the temple because of the money changers. And I'm assuming the way the money changers did it, and it's logical in some ways, to say you don't have to bring your lambs and oxen and things else all the way from everywhere else in Israel to the temple. Just come with money, and then we'll sell you, the oxen, and a small percentage fee for their service would be expected. But they must have been doing much more than that, ripping off the people, because Christ was angry, and he did it twice. Even a few days before he died, he did it. He just threw over their temple, spilled all that gold and silver, chased all the animals out, chased out the banker types who were, or accountant types who were there. Christ was such a tough guy that he probably scared those guys out of 2 years worth of growth. In other words, the sacrifice in the temple was important to New Testament Jesus Christ. And the thing about verse 18, when you get to Mark 11, I think is most interesting. After that happened, the leadership of Israel, the scribes and the Pharisees, plotted to murder Christ. And it made sense, because why didn't the temple guard stop Christ? Because the people were so pleased with what Christ did. Everybody knew they're being ripped off, and made people feel bad about giving a sacrifice at the temple. And the people probably said something like, why hasn't anybody done anything about this before? And the answer was because the scribes and Pharisees got their cut.
Yeah.
And it made them look bad. There's no other answer. They were in charge. They didn't allow that without getting the big cut. They probably getting 50%.
And that's the reason they had to rip the people off so much, was because they were taking a cut.
And the truth is, and you knew that had to embarrass them, because the people said, well, how come the leadership, the Sanhedrin, didn't do this 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Everybody knew the answer. Sure they did. They're getting their cut. And it embarrassed them so much that, they were jealous of Christ anyway. This was just one last straw. I'm only using that to prove that the sacrifice at the temple are important to God, and the desolation of the temple is a meaningful event in prophecy, because those lambs were our precursor of Jesus Christ. The Jews will understand it later. But here's another thing. I believe if the Jews build the temple near future, they're going to combine it with the Wailing Wall, the outer wall, so they can say, brick and mortar wise, that this is part of the temple that existed back in ancient times. And that means it will also have fulfilled Christ's prophecy. Remember, Christ said, not every stone would be knocked over until I return. Let's look at Matthew 24:15. It's also in Luke. Luke does the stone thing more, but you can look at all of them. But I picked Matthew out because that's the one most people are familiar with. Matthew 24.
This is a key scripture right here.
Yeah. Matthew 24:15. Let's start in verse 14 and 15. They're both great verses to read. Verse 14, Matthew 24. Christ is answering the question, when is the end of this age and his return? And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness in all nations, and then shall the end come. And I put that then in, meaning the two witnesses and the church of God are an end time factor. I don't know how it will all play out, but we have to get the message out with greater impact. Obviously, we're in a quiet period for the church now, but at some point, it's going to get bigger. Then shall the end come. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, all the Jewish people remembered that in their history books, they knew exactly what he was referring to, the swine on the altar and the statue of Zeus in the temple, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. And then he talks about get out of town quick, because the end is coming very quickly. And then, as I said, you can go to Luke and some other verses for more details. But it is one of the keys, and it's also mentioned in Revelation 11 also, that temple business. And so I did hear, as far as Israel being isolated, I heard this on Christian radio, AFR. Some of their programs are pretty good. They give stuff that nobody else in the media has found. They claim that the administration found out 2 weeks ago that Israel can reorder Tomcat missiles, or whatever the other details are, for their Iron Dome and some of their other ships, missile interceptor missiles from America. They can reorder them every couple weeks. And they were just doing that. And our government said, no more. So Israel won't get any more missiles from America. And if I were Israel, don't you think with all this growing anti-Semitism, I'd be getting worried?
Yeah, and you know what? They have to be in control of their own country when they build the temple, because if someone else is in there running the show for them, they won't let them do it, most likely. So, they've got to do this while they still have the power to do it, too.
Oh, and I failed to mention Matthew 24, verse 1. I'm going to read this in the NIV translation, but it adds what we just said, and what you said is so right, Ken. They have to be in control of their defense, because as Netanyahu said, if Hamas disarms, they have peace. If Israel disarms, it's going to be a massacre. Anyway, as Jesus left and was going out into the temple complex, Matthew 24:1, his disciples came upon him and called his attention to the temple buildings. And he replied to them, don't you see all these things? And they, of course, were impressed with the temple. I assure you, not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down. And all this fits the end time prophecy. So the fact that the Wailing Wall is there and the Jews could connect that wall to a new wall and build a new temple, then they can claim the temple connects back to the ancient temple. And I guess they'll get a heifer and do all that purification stuff and set up a new high priest, and off we go. I believe it's coming. I heard this on the radio that Netanyahu had a long list of things he'd like to accomplish. Way down in his dream list was rebuild the temple. It was something he couldn't do, of course, when he made the list out, but things could change.
A couple things, and I don't recall the scripture I was reading this week. It was talking about Gaza, and it said something to the effect of Gaza's going to be utterly destroyed, apparently, before Christ returns. And something I found just kind of noteworthy. The United Nations asked Israel to share their Iron Dome technology with Hamas to make the fighting more fair.
Well, that'd be like
how do you deal with people? How do you have a conversation with people like that? You can't.
Like in World War II, the United Nations would say, well, you got the A-bomb, America. Now I want you to give the A-bomb to the Nazis and the Japanese warlords. Well, that's the only way you make it fair, right?
That's like being out of bullets and borrowing some from your enemy, There's something we need to keep in mind here, and that is we're building scenarios based on our interpretations of these prophetic scriptures, and we're putting some speculation in there, and that's what we're doing. And I have a hard time with that because every generation does it. And it seems like every generation in the past could come up with a scenario to fit their idea of these, or their interpretation of these scriptures. So we got to be careful here. That's why I mentioned that I thought Matthew 24, 15 to 16 was very, very important, because that's concrete there. You're going to see that with your eyes. Until we see that, we're going to continue to speculate and build scenarios around our interpretations. I think we have pretty good interpretations, and we're probably getting close to it. But and Garner Ted used to emphasize that a lot. Therefore, when you see is a physical action. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Of course, once we see that cornerstone laid, once that temple is started, and we can see it, like somebody mentioned, all the TV cameras are going to be there. Then we can probably speculate a lot closer, if you know what I mean. I just we got be a little bit careful here with all our speculation.
No, you're right, and you're absolutely right. You can jump the gun on things, but we're also told to watch, to be watchmen and keep our eyes open just in case.
On the other hand, you don't want to sit on your thumb and do nothing either. I know.
Exactly. Yep, you're right.
And like you say, Gary, nobody knows for sure. Like we all are saying, ISIS has to consolidate their power. They've got to fight it out with, well, I'm assuming this to be the case. There could be some secret back deals too, like Ken mentioned. They either got to fight it out or make backroom deals with the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, maybe the power brokers in Turkey, possibly some power brokers in Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. But by the way, they do have a border with Saudi Arabia, and we heard this on talk radio. Of course, you realize they're just speculating too. They said if ISIS, they have supporters, secret supporters in Saudi Arabia, and in the Saudi Arabian army. If that's true, and they started a move on Saudi Arabia, for instance, and the army mutinied against the king, all that's very speculative, I understand. And maybe in a couple months they took over the holy sites in Saudi Arabia, like Mecca. That would give them a level of and Medina, a level of credibility that would make them dangerous. They could say, well, if you want to come to Hajj and come to Mecca, you gotta be loyal to the new caliphate. What's that guy's name? I've heard it on TV. Baghdadi. You gotta loyalty to Baghdadi and the caliphate because we now control it. I'm just saying, if they were to get the Holy Land in the next 6 months, 7, 8, 9, 10 months, and of course Saudi Arabia is full of oil wealth. They could turn a lot of that wealth into weapons and stuff too. If that were to happen, whoa, I would say people in the Middle East would be really scared. Because then Egypt would be the next big one, the biggest country. If they could take Egypt and Saudi Arabia, Libya would fall like 10 pins. Now, all that is speculation, of course. They may get shut down by their Arab rivals tomorrow. And so this could take 5, 6, 7 years of infighting for somebody to win. Maybe even, anybody think it could be 10 or 20 years?
I personally don't see the planet making another 20 years. I heard on the news, wish I could remember when, I think it was this week, that there's a lot of concern that the ISIS army or forces, or whatever you want to call it, is working their way towards Mecca, and that would be one of their end goals. So we're not the only ones that see that or speculate about that. It does. That's others are saying they believe that's what their plan is. That would be. And
I'll bet you the royal family of Saudi Arabia, I'll bet you they're talking to all their generals. Are you sure all our soldiers are loyal? And how many people can't we trust in the army? And uh, I'm just saying. I bet they're worried about it and preparing for it. In the past, countries in the Middle East could rely on America. By the way, let me explain the balance of power theory that America used in the Middle East. I'll just go through this real quickly. Because there was a time, if we go back to 1980, I don't remember all the dates, when America would switch from either supporting Iran against Iraq or Iraq against Iran. And people thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. It actually did. The balance of power theory is it's not in America's interest for any one country or one ruler to be in charge of most of the Middle East. One is that's too much oil power and too much money power in one hand. They could bring us into a oil embargo, and they could do horrible things to our economy. And, well, in the past, we were even more vulnerable to the oil embargo than we are maybe right now. But so that was our policy. There were times I'm told, and I may get the details wrong, but it looked like the Iranian army was about to knock out Saddam Hussein. This is like 20-some years ago. The U.S. had satellite information they would give to Iraq's army to stop it. Not that we wanted him to win, we just didn't want the Iranians to win. And when he was in a stronger position, when he used his poison gas against Iran, we gave information to Iran because we didn't want Saddam Hussein to win. Because if he controlled all of Iran and the stuff he had already controlled, that much oil power, it would be dangerous. And of course, Saddam Hussein wanted to be he wanted to rule the whole Middle East in his own way, even if he didn't call it a caliphate. And a successful example of balance of power is Great Britain. Great Britain didn't want any country on the continent of Europe to be so powerful they threatened England. So when the French were real strong with Napoleon, they allied with German states against France. When Germany was real strong, they allied with France against Germany. There was even the point when Russia was real strong, they allied with other countries against Russia. And the example is you don't want anybody to get too strong. Well, right now, our government probably doesn't really have a policy. I'm giving my opinion. That's what these people on television telling me. They may not even know about the balance of power theory, but one thing ought to be clear to most Americans who think strategically. It is not in America's best interest for a caliphate to come up in the Middle East. And countries like Saudi Arabia could rely on America to keep any dictator under control who looked like he was about to take over. Assuming that they all sense that America is withdrawing from that role of stabilizer of the world, or whatever role we're going to use for it, has withdrawn or is in the process of withdrawing from that role, they now have to worry that America's not going to come in and stop ISIS or anybody else. If they get too strong, it's their bacon in the fire. So I think there's going to be a lot more fear in the Middle East for a while.
Yep, I can definitely see that.
I think the only time the Middle East ever had balance, at least in recent history, is when America went in there and created it. Because as a rule, everything's out of balance in those countries. In the Middle East, with the exception of Israel.
And even when we didn't intervene, we tried to help keep any one super dictator from getting too strong. And I think you can see that.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, what you explained makes perfect sense. Keep everything unstable so no one can get the power. And once they figure that out, which it looks like they may be doing now, I still can't see that. We say this a lot. I can't see the Saudi royal family turning over or willingly of any way, shape, or form turning over their power and position in that country.
To Baghdadi, yeah, because they're in charge of the holy sites, which is a big deal in Islam. I think if Baghdadi is the man, and if the devil's picked him, my guess is he'll probably have those guys assassinated if he's able to. But I'm sure it's going to be bloody over there for a while until somebody wins.
Well, as all this is going on, it has kind of a ominous presence, doesn't it? It should make us all a little bit fearful in one way or another, but a little bit of fear can be a very healthy thing. But the book of Revelation, chapter 19, verse 20, does give us the happy ending. Want me to read it?
Yes, sir.
Revelation 19:20. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. And in the end, we win.
Absolutely.
Just hold on to the truth, and maybe we'll be in a place of safety during the worst of it. Hold on to the truth, and in the end, we win. All these beasts and dictators are going to be destroyed. However, God, it's going to be spectacular.
Yep, it sure is. We're about 45, 50 minutes in. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add before we sign off?
No. You remember that list that you sent me of topics for next week? You had them in order. Where did I put that list?
Yeah, we can discuss it, and we can discuss it off the air if you want to look for them.
I mean, why don't you pick one of the ones right at the top for next week if you want to announce it now? That anything you pick is fine with us, right?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have it on me, so we'll talk about it. But no, this is a great program. We even had comments that they enjoyed this program already, so it's good. I'm glad that everybody watches. I really do appreciate your support, and seek the kingdom first. And have a great Sabbath, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.